When you're making a decision on a personal investment choice or something else, there's a lot of factors that have to come into it. You have to consider, when did you enter the market? Are you exiting or are you entering? Like, what stage are you at? And what's your objective? So the challenge sometimes when people take it and flip it to that financial decision, I'm like, you have to think beyond just here's what the trends are.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of CREBcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Anne-Marie Lurie. You guys know her as our chief economist. I call her chief economist extraordinaire because that's what she is. So we're going to get to know Anne-Marie a little bit better today. Hi Anne-Marie.
Hi Sam.
How are you?
Good.
Good, thank you for joining us today. I know you had a really busy day at Forecast, but it's a day that you absolutely love. You love all the interaction with the members and answering all the questions. So how are you feeling today?
Much the same.
Are you feeling optimistic about the year ahead?
Honestly, I'm just interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah,
so,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody always loves to come out and see you. Like you could hear a pin drop in the room when you're speaking. I love it. So I wanted to kind of get to know you a little bit more. I mean, I know you, but our members and people to get to know you a little bit more on a personal note. And I will be asking some questions about the housing market and stuff as well. But let's start off with what originally pulled you towards economics and why did you pick real estate as the market to concentrate on?
I actually was chosen for economics.
Oh, really?
Believe it or not, it wasn't my intention. I wanted to be an accountant. And I was taking these courses at university, and it was actually a professor that pulled me in
Wow.
and said, you should really do this as a career. And I remember at the time, I was pretty young, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do with that? So, but anyway, so that's how I actually got into it. Is actually I was encouraged to pursue this, and obviously I loved it. So,
Well, so the professor saw something in you that indicated to him that you would make a great economist.
yeah. So
Yeah.
they really encouraged me to do that, and that's where I kind of pursued economics from there. And I went, okay, that sounds a lot more fun than accounting, and that's what I did. And then in terms of real estate, I think part of that was just how I started out in my career. I started off in pension investment, doing mostly commercial sort of analytics, and it just kind of started from there. So it was really that first sort of position that I had doing that sort of work that kind of geared me towards real estate, and then I just continued on with real estate.
Nice. We're glad you did. You are our only chief economist that we've ever had. I think our forecast has thrived because of you. And so I thank you for crossing our path and coming into our lives. It's been really great. Was there a moment when you realized after maybe your professor had mentioned that to you that you were like, you know what, this is what I'm really good at?
Yeah, I think so. I really liked those classes, and I did really well in them, and I enjoyed them. And so as soon as I started doing it, I've always been analytic type, so that's not really a far stretch. I mean, so doing that work, I found I really liked it, and I kind of thrived in it with schooling. And then when I got into the work world, I just continued to do it. I mean, I've always kind of worked on a few different aspects of, either heavier on the analytics and the economic side. I've also done the finance side.
Right.
So I thought that, again, I really found that I gravitated more to the economic side.
Right.
It challenges me, and it's always different.
Yeah.
It's not always the same thing.
Right,
So I
right.
think that's another part of it that keeps me interested. I mean, sometimes it's more different than I want it to be, but
Well, some people thrive on monotony, and other people like when there's ebbs and flows, and it sounds like you like it kind of ebbing and flowing for the most
I sure
part.
do, yeah.
How has your thinking about housing changed since you first started in the field?
I think I probably think of a lot more different aspects than I originally did. I have far more consideration into different areas, and I think even in working in this area, looking at some of those details that I might not have thought of it, like I think early in my career, it was much more macro focused. Now there's a lot more of looking at some of the details within, and always finding new ways to look at data.
Yeah.
I find I like to change. Like, there's some things that are always going to be the same. I'm always going to look at some of the same data.
Yes.
But looking at it from a slightly different lens has always been a good thing. So I'm learning a lot through the years just of, different approaches people take.
Yeah.
And even with talking with members, sometimes they bring up things that's like, oh, okay, that's interesting points.
Yeah.
Flushing it out through the data. So.
Yeah. And you were young when you started, so as you get older, obviously you're going to have more experience, not only with what you've learned, but also with the people that are around you. Because even being at CREB after 33 years, I still find myself having conversation with a member and going, you know what, I never really thought of it that way. And I love those moments because it makes me think outside of my little bubble that I have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And different perspectives, and even from people with different cultures to understand how, like things that you just wouldn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
With our diversified membership now, it's always good to have your finger on the pulse on, you know, what the cultural beliefs are. What part of your job do people assume is boring, but you actually love?
I don't know what they think is boring. I think some people can't imagine sitting there staring at numbers all day.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not boring. So I don't know if they think that stuff is boring or not. I think some people have an appreciation, but I'm sure some people wouldn't enjoy sitting in front of a screen all day. I know my kids tell me that all the time. At least one of them tells me, I don't know how you sit there and look at numbers all day. And I'm like, because I like them. Like they tell me a story.
When I can't fall asleep at night, I usually like do some sort of calculation in my head, and it puts me to sleep right away. So that's something I would agree with your kids that, oh my gosh, how can you stare at numbers all day? But if that's your passion, you know, and you love it, it's not hard for you. It's not work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Real estate affects people's lives so directly. How do you keep that human impact in mind when you're looking at the numbers?
I try and think of things in the way of what side of the transaction you're on. I've often said, like, the numbers will say what the numbers do say, but it's all perspective.
Yeah.
So if you're a buyer, you're probably facing a very different circumstance or want something different than if you're a seller.
Right.
So I think that I always try and put myself in, if I were purchasing or if I was selling, what are things I need to think about? Like, what should I think about if I'm, you know, at what stage in life, right? Like, I mean, oftentimes those are things numbers don't necessarily tell you.
Right.
So it's nice to know what the overall market's doing.
Yeah.
But if you're looking to, you know, if you want something affordable but you're a larger family, well, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find your product type, right? So I'm always trying to think about, well, at what, you know, how can you add value to that conversation, and how do you use the data to support different aspects of the market? Because sometimes those total numbers don't tell you things.
Yeah, yeah.
So trying to put myself in that situation of if you're active in this market.
Right. That's a good way to do it. If you put yourself into somebody else's shoes, you kind of have a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, your findings aren't so clinical. Right?
Yeah.
They're a little bit geared towards the actual people. How do you personally deal with the pressure of knowing people make financial decisions based on your analysis when you're buried deep in data?
I don't think about that. Honestly, I
love the honesty.
I don't think about that. You know, I just try to really tell you what I see through the numbers and what factors drive it. I think it's always important, especially when people are making those decisions. And often we get asked questions, well, what should I do? It really depends on your scenario. And that's the challenge sometimes is when you look at these on broad base, it's like these are overall trends.
Yeah.
But when you're making a decision on a personal investment choice or something else, there's a lot of factors that have to come into that.
Yes, exactly.
You have to consider, when did you enter the market? Are you exiting or are you entering?
Yeah.
Like, what stage are you at? And what is your long-term, like, what's your objective? So the challenge sometimes when people take it and flip it to that financial decision, I'm like, you have to think beyond just here's what the trends are.
Right.
So there's much more to it. So that's why I don't put too much weight on that per se, but for a different reason.
It'd be hard for you to do that because everybody's emotional reaction is different based on their circumstances. So you really do have to go into it without any biases.
I'm just talking about the numbers.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And, you know, and I've worked on the financial side too. So I've been on the side when you are making those investment decisions and what that means. You know, and oftentimes, I mean, it's a different lens.
Yeah.
It's a very different lens when you're thinking about it as an investment because you're not necessarily just concerned about what the market's doing today. You might be concerned about what the market's going to do over the next 10 years.
Right.
And that's why your investment horizon is really important on what you're thinking and what you're planning and really what your long-term goals are.
Yeah.
So that's why it is a little bit of a different lens when you're thinking about it as making certain financial decisions. And then, of course, you know, if it's a home that you want to live in, that's also a very different thing than just a purely financial number. Like there's much more to it.
Yeah.
I always said like what I find appealing in a home might be very different than what somebody else finds appealing.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
just like the definition of luxury.
Yes.
Luxury to me might be really different than to somebody else.
If you weren't an economist, what do you think you'd be doing instead?
Well, definitely not accounting now that I know a
Oh,
little
really?
more about it. No,
Oh,
I don't think
okay.
so. I think I would still be in some form of analytical role
Yeah.
and doing something along this lines.
Just in knowing you for the number of years I've known you, I think you would make a great instructor because you've got patience. You teach.
My kids might tell you otherwise.
Your teachings are simple, that people even like me can understand. You don't try to use all that legal jargon and and this and that. So like when you're talking, I can actually follow what you're saying because I don't know all of that world. And sometimes when I hear other people speaking, I'm just like, oh my goodness, what did they just say? So just my own personal opinion, if you weren't a chief economist, I think that maybe you would teach something to do with numbers.
I've recently been trying to teach my child math, and and she told me I'm a horrible teacher. So she's like, you just tell me how this is what it is. So I don't know.
Maybe it's because it's your kid, it's easier to do that, right? From your vantage point as chief economist, what's the biggest misconception people have about today's real estate market?
I think sometimes the challenge is people look at these overall trends and not realize that doesn't necessarily apply to a specific property. So I think that oftentimes you have to really break things out.
Right.
And I think I spend a lot of time trying to talk about, well, you hear things, well, the overall Canadian market or things like that. It's like, no, it doesn't really work that way.
Right.
You have to take it to that local level. You have to take it to that layer deep. And I know we're always talking about general trends, but it does depend. Like there is so many nuances within real estate that you have to be aware of, those local conditions. What's happening in Toronto and Vancouver is not happening in Calgary. What's happening in South Calgary might be really different than what's happening in the north part of the city. So oftentimes I just say I really try and encourage people to look beyond those headlines and break it into that next layer because things do differ. And, even when you talk about, as I was talking about, market conditions are much more balanced, well, not if you have a condo. It's a little different, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to understand some of those differences.
Yeah, that was something that really stood out to me at our annual forecast and trade show was the way that you had explained about the different markets that are out there. As you said, Vancouver and Toronto are not the same market as Calgary, but then you took it a step further and, you actually showed the analytics on like detached homes and in different parts of the city and row homes and condos and apartments and all of this kind of stuff. So I think people just make an overarching statement, including all of those property types, where you're saying, it's not all the same. It's not really comparing apples to apples. It's mostly, sometimes we're comparing apples to oranges, and that doesn't always work.
Yeah.
If you had to explain the current real estate cycle in one chart or metric, what would it be and why?
I think one of my favorite charts, at least that I use a lot, is that months of supply.
Yeah.
Because it really does give me a good indication on how prices move, and you can see it through different cycles. So that's probably one that I look at often, as well as sales to new listings rate. You're asking me to pick one, and that's not easy. Yeah. I'm like, I've got about 100 that I might look at, so I'm thinking just one is never quite enough. But I definitely like to look at that one to give me a really good thought of what could happen. I mean, typically where people are most concerned about is how prices move.
Yeah.
But prices really just as a reflection of how supply and demand are actually interacting.
Right.
So hence I say that months of supply is a really good one for me to really help determine.
Yeah. That's a good point, because then like which areas of the city or surrounding areas even, how well they're doing and what consumers can kind of expect.
Well, and that's just for the resale market. Like one thing that you have to remember is there's a lot of things that can influence that number.
Right.
So, if I go beyond just here's the actual data that I look at on the resale side, it's also what is happening in population flows?
Yes.
What's happening in migration? What drives demand fundamentally? And how does it, what's the new home side? Like there's just so many different aspects that you have to consider what's happening.
Right.
So, and again, it's just resale is almost like a reflection of some of those things that happen, that have happened. So.
Yeah. thank you. When data and intuition point in different directions, which do you trust more?
I tend to trust the data.
Yeah.
That would be, now, that being said, if there is some signals that things are going differently, I try and look at different data in different angles.
Yeah.
I've often heard, I'm feeling this, or things like this are happening, so I look to data to support it.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that data, like I never look at things as just 1 month, because 1 month is not a trend.
Right.
So sometimes if there's these signs of things that are happening, I try and look for some consistency in the data. Am I seeing changes in the data?
Right.
Am I seeing something to support it? But I generally like data supported.
Yeah. Like, knowing you the way I know you, I would imagine that would have been your answer. But being as long as you have been in the business and doing what you do, as you get more experience, I'm sure that sometimes your intuition probably kicks in a little bit, like, I've been here before and it kind of worked this way. Maybe the data isn't quite on par.
Usually if I've been here before, it's because there's been a different cycle that
Right.
we've seen like this before. And usually and often what I do is if I see similar trends, I often go back to those previous years with cycles
Right.
to look for where there's consistency.
Yeah.
So often people ask, well, part of what you're determining is because you've seen this through historical data before. So when you're feeling like when you get that intuition that things are shifting, usually it's based off of because you've been through this cycle and
Right.
you've seen data like this before.
Right.
So I wouldn't say that it's never without data behind it.
Right.
And I'm always comparing different cycles. I mean, we know we go through various business cycles, so I'm always looking at, well, how does this one compare to that one? What
Yeah.
are the differences? What
Yeah.
are things? And if people tell me about changes that they're experiencing, first thing I do is I think about, has that happened historically before?
Right.
But I mean, experience does speak to a lot. Like, I mean, when you've
Absolutely.
been doing this for a long time, usually those two things go hand in hand, but
Yeah.
they are rooted in data.
I would imagine that they would be. As far as the questions are concerned, that's all I really had prepared for you today. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you would like to end with, or was there anything else that you would like to add?
I think we've covered everything.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just kind of enjoy what I do.
And it shows.
Yep.
And it shows, yep.
And always, I always say, it's always good if there's, like, even if members have different ideas, I'm like, reach out. It's always a good thing to, like, tell me about some of the things that you're seeing, or telling me about, like, certain pain points
Yes.
that you might be facing.
Yeah.
Like, I've had many conversations with people on data stuff, and I'm like, if you need something, tell me. Like, I can't read all your minds.
Right, right.
So I try and provide as much as I can based off of what I think you might need.
Right.
But if there's things that you're not seeing, let me know.
Should we bring like a crystal ball into your office so that you can read people's minds?
Well, I try to provide as many tools as possible to help with their jobs,
Yeah.
right? I mean, but again, I've never sold anything. I have no
Right.
idea. I don't know what that's like. So I don't know if there's things that they would need that would be differently. So I really do encourage people to reach out or say, oh, could you provide this? And I'm happy to see what I can do.
Yeah. Book an appointment with you and come in and have either half-hour or 1 hour one-to-one sessions.
You can book half-hour sessions. You can book hour sessions. I find a lot of people come with their teams,
Yeah.
right? So they come with many people because, they don't want to be just one-on-one. They
Right.
want maybe 2 or 3 of them, or a group of 5 or 6.
Right.
Either way, it doesn't matter. Like, I set that time up for members so
Right.
that, they can come and ask whatever they want.
Yeah.
Maybe they want, and I've had a wide range. I'm trying to sell this house to tell me what's happening in the market to how do I pull this data?
Right.
And the point is that's your time for
Yeah.
whatever questions you may have.
Nice. I know you have a revolving door on those days because you conduct your meetings downstairs, and I don't even think that you have a sip of water. It's just back to back to back. And usually they're here early so that they don't miss one single minute with you, and I don't blame them. I think you've had a couple people that have interviewed you in the digital studio, so that's always something that you guys can do. If you need to talk to Anne-Marie and you want to put it on your Facebook pages or whatever social media platforms that you use, she'll make an appointment with you and you can have a conversation with her, which I think that would be really valuable. I really want to thank you. I know that you've been so busy. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to me. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode of the CREBcast. In the meantime, take care.